Demonology and Devil Lore, Volume 1, Part 1, Demonology. Chapter 2, The Genesis of Demons. Their good names, euphemistic, their mixed character, illustrious, Beelzebub, Loki, demon germs, the knowledge of good and evil, distinction between demon and devil. The first pantheon of each race was built of intellectual speculations. In a moral sense, each form in it might be described as more or less demonic. And indeed, it may almost be affirmed that religion, considered as a service rendered to superhuman beings, began with the propitiation of demons, albeit they might be called gods. Man found that in the earth good things came with difficulty, while thorns and weeds sprang up everywhere. The evil powers seemed to be the strongest. The best deity had a touch of the demon in him. The sun is the most beneficent, yet he bears the sunstroke along with the sunbeam, and withers the blooms he calls forth. The splendor, the might, the majesty, the menace, the grandeur, the wrath of the heavens and the elements were blended in these personifications, and reflected in the trembling adoration paid to them. The flattering names given to these powers by their worshippers must be interpreted by the costly sacrifices with which men sought to propitiate them. No sacrifice would have been offered originally to a purely benevolent power. The Furies were called the Amenides, the well-meaning, and there arises a temptation to regard the name as preserving the primitive meaning of the Sanskrit original of Arrhenius, namely Saranu, which signifies the morning light stealing over the sky. But the descriptions of the Enneades by the Greek poets, especially the Aeschylus, who pictures them as black serpent-locked, with eyes dropping blood, and calls them hounds, show Saranu as morning light, and thus the revealer of deeds of darkness, had gradually been degraded into a personification of the curse. And yet, while recognizing the name Amenides as euphemistic, we may admire none the less the growth of that rationalism which ultimately found in the epithet a suggestion of the soul of good in things evil, and almost restored the benevolent sense of Saranu. I have settled in this place, says Athene, in the Amenides of Aeschylus. These mighty deities, hard to be appeased, they have obtained a lot to administer all things concerning men. But he who has not found them gentle knows not whence come the ills of life. But before the dread Erinyes of Homer's age had become the venerable goddesses of popular phrase in Athens, or the Amenides of the later poet's high insight, piercing their Gorgon form, as portrayed by himself. They had passed through all the phases of human terror. Cowering generations had tried to soothe the remorseless avengers by complimentary phrases. The worship of the serpent, originating in the same fear, similarly raised that animal into the region where poets could invest it with many profound and beautiful significances. But these more distinctly terrible deities are found in the shadowy borderland of mythology, from which we may look back into ages when the fear in which worship is born had not yet been separated into its elements of awe and admiration, nor the heaven of supreme forces divided into ranks of benevolent and malevolent beings. And on the other hand, we may look forward to the ages in which the moral consciousness of man begins to form the distinctions between good and evil, right and wrong, which changes cosmology into religion and impresses every deity of the mind's creation to do his or her part in reflecting the physical and moral struggles of mankind. The intermediate processes by which the good and evil were detached and advanced to separate personification cannot always be traced, but the indications of their work are in most cases sufficiently clear. The relationship, for instance, between Baal and Baal-zebub cannot be doubted. The one represents the sun in his glory as quickener of nature and painter of its beauty, the other the insect-breeding power of the sun. Baal-zebub is the fly god. Only at a comparatively recent period did the deity of the Philistines, whose oracle was consulted by Isaiah, suffer under the reputation of being the prince of devils, his name being changed by the mere pun to Beelzebul, Dun God. It is not impossible that the modern Egyptian's mother's hesitation to disturb flies settling on her sleeping child and the sanctity attributed to various insects originated in the awe felt for him. The title fly god is paralleled by the reverent epithet applied to Zeus as worshipped at Elis, the Meagris deus of the Romans, the Meades mentioned by Pliny. Our picture is probably from a protecting charm, and evidently by the god's believers. There is a story of a peasant woman in a French church who was found kneeling before a marble group and was warned by a priest that she was worshipping the wrong figure, namely Beelzebub. "Never mind," she replied. "It is well enough to have friends on both sides." The story, though now only ben trovato, would represent the actual state of mind in many a Babylonian invoking the protection of the fly god against formidable swarms of his venomous subjects. Not less clear is the illustration supplied by Scandinavian mythology. In Saemon's Edda, the evil-minded Loki says, "Odin, thou shalt remember when we in early days blended our blood together." The two became detached very slowly, for their separation implied the crumbling away of a great religion and its distribution into new forms, and a religion requires relatively as long to decay as it does to grow, as we who live under a crumbling religion have good reason to know. Protap Chunder Mozumdar of the Brahmo Somaj, in an address in London, said, "The Indian pantheon has many millions of deities, and no space is left for the devil." He might have added that these deities have distributed between them all the work that the devil could perform if he were admitted. His remark recalled to me the Eddaic story of Loki's entrance into the assembly of gods in the halls of Oegir. Loki, destined to a later age to be identified with Satan, is angrily received by the deities, but he goes round and mentions incidents in the life of each one which show them to be little if any better than himself. The gods and goddesses, unable to reply, confirm the cynic's criticisms in theologic fashion by tying him up with a serpent for cord. The late Theodore Parker is said to have replied to a Calvinist who sought to convert him, "The difference between us is simple. Your God is my devil." There can be little question that the Hebrews, from whom the Calvinist inherited his deity, had no devil in their mythology, because the zealous and vindictive Jehovah was quite equal to any work of that kind, as the hardening of Pharaoh's heart, bringing plagues upon the land, or deceiving a prophet and then destroying him for his false prophecies. The same accommodating relation of the primitive deities to all natural phenomena will account of the absence of distinct representatives of evil of the most primitive religions. The earliest exemptions to this primeval harmony of the gods, implying moral chaos in men, were trifling enough. The occasional monster seems worthy of mention only to display the valor of the god who slew him. But such were demon germs, born out of the structural action of the human mind so soon as it began to form some philosophy concerning a universe upon which it had at first looked with simple wonder, and destined to an evolution of vast import when the work of moralizing upon them should follow. Let us take our stand beside our barbarian, but no longer savage ancestor in the far past. We've watched the rosy morning as it waxed to a blazing noon. Then swiftly the sun is blotted out. The tempest rages. It is a sudden night, lit only by the forked lightning that strikes tree, house, man with angry thunder peal. From an instructed age, man can look upon the storm blackening the sky not as an enemy of the sun, but one of its own superlative effects. But some thousands of years ago, when we were all living in Eastern barbarism, we cannot conceive that a luminary whose very business it was to give light could be a party to his own obscuration. We then looked with pity upon the ignorance of our ancestors, who had sung hymns to the storm dragons, hoping to flatter them into quietness, and we came by irresistible logic to that dualism which long divided the visible and still divides the moral universe into two hostile camps. This is the mother principle out of which demons, in the ordinary sense of the term, proceeded. At first view, as distinguished from the host of deities by exceptional harmfulness, they were multiplied with man's growth in the classification of his world. Their principle of existence is capable of indefinite expansion until it shall include all the realms of darkness, fear, and pain. In the names of demons, and in the fables concerning them, the struggles of man in his age of weakness with peril, want, and death are recorded more fully than in any inscriptions on stone. Dualism is a creed which all superficial appearances attest. Side by side, the desert and the fruitful land, and the sunshine and the frost, sorrow and joy, life and death, sit weaving around every life its vesture of bright and somber threads, and science alone can attest how each of these casts the shuttle to the other. Enemies to each other, they will appear in every realm which knowledge has not mastered. There is a refrain gathered from many ages in William Blake's apostrophe to the tiger. Tiger, tiger, burning bright in the forests of the night, what immortal hand or eye framed thy fearful symmetry? In what distant deeps or skies burned that fire within thine eyes? On what wings dared he aspire? What the hand dared seize the fire? When the stars threw down their spears and water heaven with their tears, did he smile his work to see? Did he who made the lamb make thee? That which one of the devoutest men of genius whom England has produced thus asked was silently answered in India by the serpent worshipper kneeling with his tongue held in his hand. In Egypt, by Osiris seated on a throne of Chakir. It is necessary to distinguish clearly between the demon and the devil, though. For some purposes, they must be mentioned together. The world was haunted with demons for many ages, before there was any embodiment of their spirit in any central form, much less any conception of a principle of evil in the universe. The early demons had no moral character, not any more than the man-eating tiger. There is no outburst of moral indignation mingling with the shout of victory when Indra slays Viricha, and Apollo's face is serene when he dart pierces the python. It required a much higher development of the moral sentiment to give rise to the conception of a devil. Only that intensest light could cast so black a shadow athwart the world as the belief in a pure malignant spirit. to such a conception, love of evil for its own sake. The word devil is limited in this work. Demon is applied to beings whose harmfulness is not gratuitous, but incidental to their own satisfaction. Deity and demon are from words once interchangeable, and the latter has simply suffered degradation by the conventional use of it to designate the less benevolent powers and qualities which originally inhered in every deity, after they were detached from these separately personified. Every bright god had his shadow, so to say, and under the influence of dualism, this shadow attained a distinct existence and personality in the proper imagination. The principle having once been established, that what seemed beneficent and what seemed the reverse must be ascribed to different powers, it is obvious that the evolution of demons must be continuous, and their distribution coextensive with the ills that flesh is heir to.